Hi, thank you for joining me today. Today I wanted to break down a level that I built for The Last of Us from the point of view of a game designer. I've done a couple of game design presentations recently, and the format that I chose was I would build a level beforehand and then I would play it live in the presentation, and I would talk through the design decisions and tips and tricks as I went. And I think as a vehicle for communicating game design ideas, it was quite successful. But there was a little part of me that felt like if I was a designer watching these presentations, I would think, of course they work in this scenario because you built this level to communicate that specific point. How would it work if it was employed in a real game? So that's what I want to do today. I thought it might be a more honest way of communicating design implementation if I looked at a real game that I'd helped build and that others have had the chance to play and form their own opinions about. Also, I'm just really excited to play The Last of Us Part 2 myself, so that's why it's this game and that's why it's right now. So today we're going to look at the bus depot from The Last of Us. So that's quite near the end of the game. Obviously, spoilers for anyone who hasn't played it. But yeah, let's just jump straight in.
Ellie! Ellie! Did you hear me?
No. What?
Look. Hospital. This is where we get off. Let's go, kiddo.
Before we get started, I guess it's worth touching on just how the level was built. The way that we would start each level is we would lay out the essential narrative and gameplay beats that have to happen in this level. And there might only be a handful of these, but they form the foundations upon which the rest of the level is built. So for this level, the first thing that we have to communicate is the effects that the journey has taken on Ellie emotionally. So for the majority of the adventure, Ellie has been this youthful, inquisitive, bubbly character, which plays nicely off Joel's cynicism. And in the previous level, she has to become the protector. Joel gets injured and she has to look after him. And that sequence of events drags her through some horrific and traumatic scenarios, which really take their toll on Ellie's character. So we have to show right off the bat that Ellie's character is shutting down emotionally and withdrawing into herself. And we do this in a couple of simple ways. Initially, we just have her hang back from the player and drag her feet and just follow really timidly behind. Usually she would be out in front because that's where the player will see Ellie's character, so she'll run ahead and point things out and be inquisitive about the environment. So here we have her hang back. And then there's a couple of narrative beats that cascade quite quickly from that starting point. So Ellie sees some beautiful, majestic creatures in the wild, and that brings the old Ellie back to the surface. It brings Ellie back to life, and that allows Joel to see the contrast between where Ellie was at the start of the journey and where she is now, and the toll that the journey has taken on her, and that makes him question whether this journey is even worth it. And then we also show Ellie's resolve because she is the one to say, no, we should finish this. So those things happened quite quickly in succession at the start of the level. So I'll call these beats out as and when we get to them throughout the level, but this is basically the structure that we built the rest of the game on, and these things had to happen. Cool, okay, let's get going.
Feel that breeze, huh? I tell you, on a day like this, I just sit on my porch, pick away at my six string. Yeah, once we're done.
So the first thing that I want the player to do is to go inside this RV on the left hand side of the road and explore there. So the player starts on the right hand side of the road, so I push them over to the left hand side by putting blocks in the way in the form of these cars, and on the left I angle the broad side of the RV towards the player so that they can see the door really clearly. And that's probably enough to get them inside, to be honest, but we also used some noise and some animation to sort of attract the player further. So when you approach, there's a flock of birds on the floor and you startle them and they fly away, and they fly off to the left hand side of the screen to pull your attention over to the left towards the RV.
What do you say, huh?
When the player gets inside the RV, they're going to find some collectibles and a little narrative moment in the form of this photograph with some writing on the back. And they'll probably assume that that's why I wanted them to go in there, is to collect some resources to craft. But if you look through the door as you're inside the RV, you'll see Ellie walking ahead of the player and getting into position for a conversation. So that's actually why I wanted to distract the player into the RV. Because like I said earlier, Ellie is dragging her feet and following slowly behind the player. So for us to have a little conversation, she needs to get in front of the player somehow, and that's going to require us distracting the player inside the RV for a short moment.
And right before we crash, I wake up. I've never been on a plane. Isn't that weird?
Well, you know, dreams are weird.
So this area here is used as a choke point to funnel the player into a specific position. So what I mean by that is the bottom of the freeway is quite open, but there's actually only one small area where the player can climb over the fence at the bottom of the road. So there's barbed wire across most of the fence, and then there's a small gap in the barbed wire. And I know that the player has to jump over the fence at that specific point. And you would use a choke point if you wanted to show the player something very specific. So here I'm going to use it to point out the hospital and highlight the player's goal so that they know roughly where they're going, which direction they're heading in the level, and also just to remind them of their narrative goal. So when they climb up onto the burnt out cars and onto the bus, we use a hint to show the player where they're going to go. And we're going to try and reinforce this goal as many times as possible in the level, just to keep reminding them of their long-term goal. So we've just entered the bus station now, and I know that the exit from the main lobby of the bus station is actually one floor above the player if they're on the ground floor, and that can make it quite hard to see. So something that I did to make it a little bit more visible as an exit was I had the player come in at the same level as the exit, and then they can see it directly in their field of view. They can see it right in front of them, and then they go down some steps into the main lobby of the bus station.
Well, we could use that ladder. Here we go. Ellie? Ellie?
What?
The ladder. Come on.
Right.
So this moment's really interesting. It's one of my favourites in the level. The player is going to boost Ellie up to the ladder, and Ellie's going to drop the ladder down. So this boost mechanic is something that the player has done countless times throughout the adventure up until this point. And it's always acted in the same way, so we've established a rule set with the player, and they are going to expect a specific thing to happen. But when the player tries to boost Ellie up here, she doesn't respond. In this particular case, she ignores the player. That feels like it's going to be bad game design. Like the player is expecting a specific thing to happen and the game ignores them, and that's quite frustrating. But the benefit of using it here is we communicate a story beat with a game mechanic, which is much more powerful than just telling the player what to feel. It's like the game is pushing back against them and saying, no, listen, this is how Ellie is right now, and that offsets any frustration that the player feels. It's kind of the holy grail of game design, to try and tell a story through the systems and the mechanics that the player has at their disposal.
Oh my god.
And then we follow up that frustrating moment of the game not listening to you when you want to boost Ellie with a sequence of also quite frustrating moments. It's quite interesting. So here Ellie could just place the ladder down, and then you'd walk up to the ladder and climb it. But instead she hears a noise behind her, and then she drops the ladder, which makes the simple act of climbing the ladder turn into a much more complicated thing of picking the ladder up, placing it on the wall and climbing up it, all whilst worrying about what's happened to Ellie because she's heard a noise and she's run off to an area that you can't get to. So in this world, this dangerous post-apocalyptic world, that seems like a really unwise thing to do. And there's a couple more sequences around the corner as well, which should be quite interesting to see.
What the hell is...
So Ellie's tone and the music are probably going to reassure the player so they're not worrying about anything dangerous happening to the player now, but they're still not sure what is happening. So the first moment of frustration, of teasing the player, I guess is more appropriate to say, is the muddy windows, the cloudy windows on the right hand side of this hallway. You can see a shadow pass by, but you can't see what the shadow is. So that's the most obscure of the teasers, but it doesn't last too long. We go round the corner, and the next moment we catch a glimpse, a really short glimpse of the creature. And the player probably realises it's a giraffe at this point, but it's so fleeting that it's still going to be quite frustrating. You don't get that satisfying reveal that you want. And then the player goes over this bridge and they get an even bigger look at the giraffe, but they're underneath the bridge and the glass of the bridge is all broken and it sort of obscures the view and you don't get a nice satisfying reveal. So all of these small frustrations are just building up tension and building up anticipation for something like this. So when you do get the final reveal of the giraffe, it feels slightly more earned and it feels like a release of tension, which hopefully makes it feel a bit more impactful to the player. So if you imagine walking into the bus station and just seeing a giraffe just there immediately and you could walk up and pet it, it would feel completely out of the blue, it would feel quite unusual, and it would feel completely unearned, and it wouldn't have the same impact on the player. So by pushing back and frustrating them, that creates tension, but also anticipation, because they know that something is coming, and then we sort of hold that off for as long as is reasonable to make the final reveal more impactful. Hopefully. Who knows if it works or not.
Where's it off to? Here, come on, let's go.
Slow down, kiddo.
What's really funny is that's like a really big moment in the game, and you don't need to interact with that giraffe. You can walk straight past it. I think you might be able to avoid that room entirely, because there's just no mechanical way that you could stop the player from walking straight up these stairs and out the door. This dark stairwell is just deliberately as dark and as claustrophobic as possible, to make the reveal on the rooftop as impactful as possible again. So the rooftop is bright and open and colourful, and the space that preceded it was dark and narrow, and hopefully that makes the rooftop feel even brighter and even more colourful and even more open by contrast.
So, is everything you were hoping for?
It's got its ups and downs, but you can't deny the view, though.
So the player can go and share this moment with Ellie on the rooftop, and I'm pretty certain that this animation just will loop forever if the player doesn't press anything on the control stick. And it's just because this moment is such a rare moment of peace and respite in what is essentially a very harrowing and arduous journey. And it felt really unfair to take the player out of that moment before they were ready to carry on with the adventure. So we just let it loop forever and ever and ever, and then as soon as the player pushes down on the left stick, the player will break out of the animation. So it feels a little bit less egregious if the player is the person to stop that moment and carry on with the game. Also, a fun little Easter egg is the the baseball field that the herd of giraffe are walking across is named after my wife, and you can see that on the score board on the right hand side. And well, our last name is Field, so Bethany Claire Field seemed like we could get away with that. But yeah, just to always put as many Easter eggs in your games as you can, because they're fun. So this cutscene marks the end of the giraffe sequence, and it's actually the narrative beat that the whole giraffe sequence was setting up. So the giraffes have allowed Ellie to come back to life a little bit, and it's shown Joel the contrast between where Ellie was at the start of the adventure and where she is now after the whole adventure has taken its toll on Ellie. And it makes him question whether any of it is worth it. And so he suggests that they cut their losses and just return to Jackson. And Ellie, with her stronger resolve, says, no, we've got to see this through to the end, otherwise none of it was worth it. And then as Ellie leaves, we also see the giraffes leave as well. So that's kind of representing the loss of Ellie's innocence and childhood as they pursue this goal. So now we're coming down off the high of seeing the giraffe and crashing back down to reality. So I literally represented that in level design terms. So you go down a steep, dark stairwell and you go down into a very dingy, grimy looking waiting room. And it's interesting to contrast sort of this kind of space with the whole of the giraffe sequence level design, because it's as soon as you go up into the coffee shop and up all the way to the roof, there's no visible signs of suffering or conflict. There's no burnt out cars, there's no like discarded luggage, there's no dead bodies. And then as soon as like you come off that high of seeing these amazing, beautiful, majestic creatures, you come crashing back down to the reality of the situation. So it's kind of cool just to mirror that in level design, in tone as well. Something that I tried here to try and make the spaces feel as believable as possible was I would layer in history. So I would first start with what the space was before the outbreak. So this was a bus station, so I would just build a bus station. I would have in mind the level flow, but I would build it as realistically as possible at a scale that feels good for our mechanics. And then I would layer in what happened to the space when the outbreak happened. So this bus station is a really good point of central transport links. So it's good for getting lots of people on buses and off to a military city or to a hospital. So this became like a triage, and they put barricades up at the bottom of the freeway so that people couldn't just freely walk into this controlled zone. If you were infected, they would keep you out, and they would control the flow of people into the bus station. And then from there, they would sort you into different groups, maybe healthy and maybe people that need medical attention. And then you'd get on different buses and you'd go off to these other places. And people that needed a lot of medical attention would be cared for in the triage itself. So that's the second layer. And then the third layer is what has happened in the 20 years since outbreak, and that's just basically nature reclaiming the land. So as much foliage and crumbling concrete and roots sort of eating away at buildings as possible. And that just kind of helped me make it feel grounded. It kind of takes away a lot of the possibility space, which makes it easier to make decisions, I guess. Oh yeah, okay, so this is a map which describes exactly what I was trying to communicate before. This is a route that a survivor would take down off the freeway into the bus station, and then they would either go along one of these two routes to the hospital or the evacuation route to a military city. And what's nice is this is the exact same route that Joel and Ellie take through the level, so you're following the path of these environmental story beats, and you can piece together what happened to survivors or people trying to survive during the initial outbreak. If I'm honest, this map bugs me quite a bit because it shows how on grid my level design was at the time. So we made the map just by taking a top-down screenshot of the block mesh and then painting over it. And you can see that mostly every building is aligned perfectly to the grid, which isn't very realistic.
Joel, I got something for you.
So this moment is actually more interesting than I think it looks initially, because it feels like it's just a scripted conversation between Ellie and Joel, but actually there's an element of player choice, which is the player has to choose to press triangle to take the photo off Ellie, and in a game like this where we're always trying to make sure that the narrative is never undermined by any of our mechanics or any of our level design, we have to bear in mind what the two outcomes could be. So if the player takes the photograph from Ellie, Joel's going to say one thing and it's going to mean one thing narratively. But what does it mean if the player just chooses to turn around and walk away? And does that undermine the moment? Does that feel like it's out of character for Joel? So how does that impact the story and the tone of the game? And I think here we got quite lucky. I wouldn't say that this was entirely by design. I think this one just sort of fell into place. If you take the photograph, he's like accepting the gift and he's saying thank you. And if you walk away, I think Joel says something like, "You hold on to that kid. Those memories are too painful." So whatever the player does, it kind of reinforces the narrative that we're trying to construct. So I think we got quite lucky there.
I guess you can't escape your past. Thank you.
So we've got some very, very clear signage pointing the way towards the hospital. And this is our second moment, I guess, of reinforcing the player's goal. It's quite a fleeting moment. The player immediately walks down this slope into an underground tunnel. This is what's called denial and reward. You can see where you're going, but then all of a sudden to get there you have to lose sight of your goal. And that uncertainty of knowing how far away you are or whether you're even going to get there is good, because it creates tension for the player. If you could always see your goal, it's not as exciting because you can always tell exactly how far left you've got to go. This is quite a good spot to split the level, so I'll pause here for now, but thank you very much if you've listened this far, and if it's something that you've enjoyed and you would like to hear more of, then we can definitely do the second half of this level. Just let me know and we'll see how it goes. Thank you very much. Bye.